For thousands of years, generational wealth built itself at a crawl. A farmer's son acquired an extra acre of land before passing it to the next generation. But in the late 1990s, humanity witnessed a staggering economic leap. Young adults stepped off their family's agricultural plots and grabbed a computer mouse, and in their very first month brought home a paycheck larger than their civil servant parents had earned after 30 years of loyal government service. The true engine for this massive wealth transfer was a quiet panic brewing on the other side of the planet. Western corporations were building the early internet, terrified of what would happen to their databases when the calendar flipped to the year 2000. They desperately needed thousands of hands on keyboards to fix code, test software, and patch systems, and their domestic labor markets were empty, so they looked east. This desperation poured foreign capital directly into Indian cities. Quiet, dusty outskirts were rapidly paved over to create massive tech hubs. Madhapur and Hyderabad, the electronic cities of Bengaluru, the corporate parks of Pune, they seemingly sprouted out of dry fields overnight. The domestic hubs were lucrative, but the ultimate prize lay further west. Through an aggressive system of body shopping, via giants like Infosys, Wipro, and TCS, tens of thousands of young engineers were packaged up and shipped to Silicon Valley, New Jersey, Canada, and the UK. It was a direct ticket to the highest tiers of the global middle class. Securing that ticket between 1997 and 2010 required a very specific set of industrial-era skills applied to a digital canvas. If you had a strong work ethic, could perform basic coding or quality assurance, and possessed the speed to handle high-pressure environments, you were set. Above all else, you needed pattern recognition, the ability to look at a process, memorize the rules, and repeat it flawlessly. For an entire generation of parents watching their neighbors build large villas and buy luxury cars, the lesson was obvious. They codified these requirements into a rigid formula. If you force a child to memorize technical patterns, grind through endless practice tests, and secure an engineering degree, they will be guaranteed a lifetime of wealth. The playbook was flawless. Then the timeline shifted. By the mid-2010s, that newly wealthy middle class had children of their own, and into the hands of those children, they placed something small, glowing, and endlessly distracting. The smartphone arrived, and it quietly rewired the cognitive development of millions of kids before they even reached middle school. Parents, busy maintaining their newly acquired lifestyles, outsourced their parenting to digital babysitters. Instead of deep reading or complex problem solving, a child's brain was fed a non-stop diet of hyper-stimulating 10-second reels. Attention spans fractured entirely. Yet, the expectation for absolute academic dominance never faded. To compensate for this digital distraction, parents doubled down on the old playbook. They enrolled 12-year-olds into brutal coaching factories starting in the 6th grade. These institutions strip away curiosity, replacing it with grueling, high-pressure rote memorization meant to beat standardized tests. Families are still betting everything on this outdated system. Parents are routinely taking out massive bank loans, 40 to 60 lakh rupees, to send these rote-trained graduates to the United States, fully expecting the Silicon Valley pipeline of 2005 to still be open and waiting for them. We have effectively engineered an entire generation to behave exactly like low-level computers. They are exceptionally good at memorizing data and repeating sequences without actually understanding the underlying logic, while their deeply human traits, creativity, resilience, and independent thought, have been completely starved. And that is the exact moment artificial intelligence stepped onto the stage. Just as millions of these heavily indebted, mechanically trained graduates are knocking on the doors of the global job market, the locks are being changed. This flowchart maps the direct collision between human labor and automation. The great tragedy of this crisis is what AI actually does well. It is the absolute master of pattern recognition. Every single entry-level workflow that built the 1990s middle class, the repetitive data entry, the routine quality assurance, the basic code writing, AI looks at that exact structure and swallows it whole, instantly, for pennies on the dollar. The corporate response has been brutal. Tech giants that wildly overhired during the pandemic are now actively trimming their bloated workforces. Executives are heavily leaning on AI restructuring as a convenient shield to lay off thousands of workers while keeping their stock prices high. For those looking to escape the domestic crunch, the international safety valve has slammed shut. Severe political shifts in the US and across the West have driven a massive rise in protectionist policies. Securing a work visa as an average, run-of-the-mill engineering graduate is now incredibly rare. Even the most prestigious institutions in the country are feeling the tremors. Back home in India, recent reports from elite campuses like IIT Bombay reveal a harsh reality. Placement rates for top-tier graduates have plummeted, hovering around just 50%. This forces a terrifying calculation. If brilliant graduates from the most rigorous technical institutions on Earth, alongside veterans with a decade of Silicon Valley experience, are finding themselves obsolete, what hope does an average engineering student trained purely on memorization have? It is easy to view this exclusively as a story of destruction, but that misses half the equation. Artificial intelligence is erasing repetitive roles, but it is simultaneously creating a highly specialized category of employment at the top. These new positions operate on a strict set of rules that completely invalidate the old coaching factory models. They require everything rote learning destroys. To manage and direct AI tools, you need deep conceptual understanding. You need genuine creativity, collaborative teamwork, high emotional intelligence, and an insatiable curiosity to learn things that aren't on the syllabus. You cannot hack this process. You cannot send a 22-year-old who has spent their entire life regurgitating test answers to a 6-month crash course in a Meerkat and expect them to suddenly develop complex human ingenuity. These are deep-rooted cognitive skills, not syntax you can cram into a weekend. On a national scale, surviving this transition requires an urgent pivot. A massive rote-trained workforce cannot all smoothly transition to high-level AI management. To absorb the millions of young people entering the economy, governments must rapidly invest in large-scale manufacturing and heavy industries, providing physical, tangible jobs that algorithms cannot yet touch. If we fail to do this, the math turns dangerous. Taking millions of young adults, burdening their families with crushing debt, giving them an education the market violently rejects, and leaving them to stare at social media all day is a recipe for severe social and political unrest. The ultimate responsibility falls on parents. You must stop living in the glory days of the dot-com boom. The metrics for success have completely detached from the systems you grew up trusting. You have to stop treating your children's minds like hard drives waiting to be filled with data, and start raising them to be highly adaptable, critical thinkers. 1997 was the internet revolution, driven by human labor and repetitive coding. 2026 is the AI revolution, driven by complex problem-solving and creative logic. They are entirely different battlefields, and if you force the next generation to fight tomorrow's war using yesterday's playbook, they will lose.